7 decades ago, we were all so young, full of piss and vinegar, as they say, ready for the great crusade which lay ahead of us. We were out for payback because of the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, some far-off place many of us had never even heard of prior to December 7th, 1941.
And I finished out that school year and enlisted in the Army in 1942. August of 42, I ended up in Toccoa, Georgia.
Most of us were still teenagers, with nicknames like Burr, Popeye, Buck, Moonbeam, Smokey, Moose, Frenchie, Punchy, Hack, Red, Skinny, and Mo. We joined the fight from all over the country: California, Virginia, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Louisiana, and Pennsylvania. We came from big cities and small towns. We chose to become paratroopers because it was new and promised adventure. The extra $50 in our paychecks didn't hurt either.
When they pay you $100 a month to be a paratrooper, to jump behind the lines, that is blood money. You earn it.
I volunteered. Sometimes the guys would say, start bitching. I said, you know, guys, you volunteered. So it worked out. We had a lot of good guys, a lot of them. And I'll never forget it.
There was new outfits coming on that was airborne, and they needed people, and anybody interested, they'd sign them up. And nobody said a word. And then the guy says, and you get $50 a month extra. Well, about 20 hands went up, mine included. Because $50 in them days was a lot of money.
I wanted to be a gunner, and it's colorblind, and I thought I'd take that. I wanted to get in combat. I was afraid it'd be over before I was ready, before I could get in. I was even scared of heights, but I thought, well, if they can do it, I can too.
I had no idea what a mortar was. I didn't have any idea about much of the things in the service. But they told me you're a mortar man, and then they hold out this three-legged thing and taught you how to use it. The worst part of that was carrying it.
Many of my fellow Easy Company soldiers, good friends like Robert Van Klinken, would never see America again. And they still lie in peaceful cemeteries in Holland, France, Belgium, Luxembourg.
There are heroes. We're not heroes. They are. We are survivors.
For those of us who did come home, such as fellow E Company veterans Amos Buck Taylor, there wasn't a day that went by that we didn't think about our friends who never enjoyed life after World War II. For us old guys who are alive and remain, such as Ed Tipper, the bond we still share after all these years is unshakable. It's an unspoken thing that links the paratroopers of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. A connection as firm today as it was on July 1st, 1942, when Company E, 2nd Battalion of the 506, was formed in the oppressive heat and mosquito-infested woods of Toccoa, Georgia.
None of us, as far as I know, talked about the war at all until we were in our 60s and 70s. And the reason we didn't is war is so horrible that unless you've actually been in it, there's no point in even trying to talk to somebody and explain it to them.
Fellow soldiers like Lynn Buck Compton and millions of other Americans were just doing our part in World War II, doing a job for our country. But in combat, we mostly fought for those fellow paratroopers alongside us. men we could always count on when the fight became fierce, especially in far-off land with names that had become legendary for sacrifice and courage. Places like Normandy, France, Hell's Highway in Holland, and Bastogne, Belgium.
I think the military experience, and especially combat, has a certain way of bringing people together that's probably different and stronger maybe than any other forces or circumstances that you might imagine.
We became brothers, we citizen soldiers, men such as Clancy Lyall, Floyd Talbert, George Potter, Ed Pepping, Walter Hendricks, Jerry Wenzel, Levon Reese, and Herman Hack Hansen. Relationships that were forged under circumstances and conditions only experienced in combat, and as witnesses to atrocities which men can commit against one another. Just a handful of us remain, and our numbers grow smaller each day. But the stories will always be with us, even as our comrades join those who never made it home and who lie under the white crosses and stars of David in foreign cemeteries, countries that boys like Warren Skipmuck, Alex Pencala, Terrence Salty Harris, and Robert Blauser fought so hard to liberate from the Germans.
When you go through combat together, the men who have been there, it's such an extraordinary experience that they are melded into this incredibly tight, cohesive unit.
You had to come across that knoll, and if you remember, when you went on the other side, you had to go down there. You slid down that hill, and that German was over on your right there.
Slid?
You slid right down that hill.
I didn't sled.
Yeah, you did too.
We jumped over it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was steep there.
Darrell Shifty Powers and Earl McClung didn't know each other before December 7th, 1941. McClung grew up on the banks of the Columbia River on an Indian reservation in eastern Washington state. Powers, also with a touch of Native American in him, in the hills of rural Dickinson County, Virginia. World War II brought them together, and back to the woods outside of Foy, Belgium, more than 6 decades later. In between all those years since the Battle of the Bulge, an unwavering friendship endured, its foundation built during battle and reliance on one another, not unlike the bond all we paratroopers in Easy Company share.
I think it's probably the fact that we were both of Native American descent. If you were an Indian, they made the first scout out of you. Whether you could walk, crawl, cross-eyed, blind, or anything, if you were an Indian, you were a first scout. That's it.
It does bring back a lot of bad memories, but we had tried to have some distractions. You know, we'd aggravate each other in an area like this. Maybe go under a tree and shake some snow down on somebody. This is great to be standing here and know that I can stand up and not be shot. I think about this area, think about the place and the people I served with here.
There is not much argument from the other soldiers in E Company. From Wild Bill Gaunier to Don Malarkey, the combat brought us together and is the reason for the relationships many of us still hold close today. But before we jumped into the fight, there was training, and for the original paratroopers of the 506, that meant Camp Toccoa, Georgia, Currahee Mountain, and Captain Herbert Sobel, the Black Swan as he was known to his men. Sobel was as mean as a grizzly bear with a toothache, and as predictable as the stock market. We all thought that if Sobel ever did lead us into battle, it was better than a 50-50 chance he would have been shot by one of his own soldiers.
I never did get along with Sobel. I didn't understand him. I was in conflict with him almost all the time. But a lot of the guys say Sobel made E Company, and I agree with that.
If it hadn't been for Sobel, we wouldn't have been here. He trained us heck out of us. They didn't like him, they got rid of him, but Sobel made us.
An excellent training officer. Didn't know his ass from whole lot about combat. Every time we had maneuvers, he screwed everything up. Period. He didn't know what the hell to do.
He was a drill instructor. I mean, very few men enjoy their drill instructor.
The physical training in Toccoa was intense for the 132 enlisted men and the 8 officers who made up the company. Men like Sav Matheson, Gordy Carson, Tommy Burgess, Chuck Grant, William Dukeman, Al Mampry, and Paul Rogers were preparing for the mission ahead of them. Colonel Robert Sink was the commander of the 506th. Sobel reported to Colonel Robert Strayer, who reported to Sink.
It started in Toccoa, Georgia, and that's where we got our training.
They had a lot of physical exercise, you know, and nighttime marches and things like that.
Maybe 15, 20 miles a day.
Real rigorous training there in Toccoa, and a lot of people couldn't make it.
It was rugged, I mean, but it was worth it.
And at the end of that period in Toccoa, we had to go for parachute training.
To get your wings, you had to jump five times.
There's definitely something about being there from the start. And yet, you know, a man like Earl McClung was not a Toccoa man. He joined a little bit later, and he was accepted very well. He's definitely one of the stalwart men of the group. Buck Compton as well. He didn't join until England, and yet he was very much accepted by the men.
The story of the men of Easy Company, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne, debuted in print in 1992. In reality, the author of the book could have focused on a company, a regiment, and any division in Europe. It just so happened that he and his team came across us, a group of rowdy paratroopers. Oh, and we could get rowdy.
And we walked in, went to the concierge and said, you have a group here from the 101st Airborne having a reunion. Where might we find them? And it was really the first funny thing that happened that day, because the concierge looked at me and said, I don't know who they are, but they're mighty loud.
I was having dinner with my wife, and she said, there's somebody on the phone who wants to talk to you. His name is Ambrose. And I talked to him, and I said, this was 50 years after the war. I said, I really don't remember an awful lot about what went on, but I'll give it a go. And I did, and I'm glad I did. It all came back to me. It took a while, but it did.
The book would become a television miniseries that began filming in the spring of 2000, debuting to critical acclaim in September the following year. For the Hollywood actors chosen for the miniseries, it would prove to be the most important roles of their careers. This was more than just acting for them. It was history, and every detail and mannerism had to be spot on for the veteran they were representing. They tell me it wasn't acting as much as a tribute to the soldiers who fought and died in World War II.
We just knew from day one that this was real, and we knew it was big, and we knew it was important, and I think every single one of us made sure that we went home at night knowing that we'd done our men justice, because it was a story that everybody knew about World War II, but we knew we were going to reach an audience of our generation, which was important to us to put this story out to our generation, to let the kids of today know exactly what these men did and what they went through and what they've achieved for us in our lifetime.
The funny thing about these guys is that you couldn't get information from Frank about Frank. Like if you'd call up Frank and be like, Frank, I need some information about this, what happened in Foy, when you got shot. His first instincts, when he would be telling the story, then he would automatically go to talk about the person who was to the right of him or to the left of him. And you're like, no, Frank, I need to know about you. I'd be like, yeah, but it was just so funny. So in order to get information about Frank, I actually went to Donnie Wahlberg and said, Donnie, can you give me Lipton's number? Because he's always talking about Lipton, and maybe Lipton will tell me something about him. They never said things about each other.
This project was not just some form of entertainment. This goes so far beyond anything I ever expected to be part of in my lifetime. To do something that is your work that you love, but can affect the families on so many levels, affect Americans and people around the world who are still alive, to help understand these stories of what these people went through on both sides. And I think that for these men to share these stories is, I just got to believe it's good for their souls.
Being there from the early formation of Easy Company, or being labeled a Toccoa man, is a badge of honor worn by a select few men such as Daniel West, Rod Bain, Roy Pickle, Bill Wingate, Bert and Pat Christensen, Ralph Stafford, Rod Stroll, Robert Marsh, and Don Hubler.